Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Former Action Guys podcast. Summer's almost here. Perfect timing for custom t-shirts and gear for reunions, barbecues, or your next unit event. You can visit jcramergraphics.com now to grab popular items like shirts, hoodies, and hats to support the show. Doing a group order, reach out and I'll send you a discount code so everyone orders individually. Skip the hassle of organizing money, sizes, and colors. I've been there. It's no fun. Always remember free shipping on orders over $75. Need a custom design? Just let us know. We've got your back. Again, visit jcramergraphics.com. Thanks for the support, and let's get to the show.
Yeah, it reminds me of the first, deployments to Afghanistan and all of our ETACs. I remember I went to REI one day and I'm like looking around. I'm like, what the hell? Like, why do you have a basket full of stuff? And are you putting that on the unit card? And they're like, yeah, man. Like, aren't you guys getting all kitted up for this thing? I'm like, not like you guys are.
Really? That's awesome. That's that doesn't happen anymore. But I will say the gear has gotten a lot better.
Oh, 100%.
Over the years. Like now, I was in the Marines, so now like you look at an infantry guy that's in the Marines, he almost looks like a recon guy from 5-10 years ago. Because they're all wearing Pelletors, they're all running around with suppressed rifles, like
cutaway helmets,
cutaway helmets. Yeah, it was definitely not what we saw, which is weird that all that stuff came into play after the global war on terror, when we knew during the global war on terror that like that was all good equipment because SOCOM was using it. There was a lot of people using it, but what are you gonna do? When you decided to join, so you went almost directly into the Rangers. You didn't contract.
I did go directly into the Rangers.
Well, you contracted as infantry, right? And then you volunteered at jump school, correct?
Correct. So I had an unassigned airborne infantry contract, and then the way it was back then is that guys would do airborne school before they would do Ranger Indoctrination program. And so I volunteered while I was in airborne school by just going to the Patches building and persisting and getting my name on the roster. And so I ended up, the first unit that I ever was in was the 2nd Ranger Battalion. So I went immediately after jump school. I went to Ranger Indoctrination program, got my ass handed to me just like everybody else did, passed, and was assigned to Alpha Company 2nd Ranger Battalion up at what is now known as Joint Base Lewis McChord.
Now, when you joined, though, was that a goal, or was that like a goal down the road, or obviously you're happy you went right into it because you volunteered for it.
Yeah, I thought that I had to kind of walk the progression. I didn't know that you could be a private in the Rangers until I was in basic training. And in the end of the basic training cycle, we got a new drill sergeant Coronado. He had been in 3rd Ranger Battalion, and he said, you know what, Young, you should really try out and go to RIP. And I said, well, yeah, I'd love to, but I got to be like a sergeant for that, right? And he's like, what are you talking about? No. And so I found out basically in the last month of basic training. And from then I was just like, game on. This is exactly where I want to be. I want to be with the best.
Yeah, for sure. Now, is that opportunity open to a lot of people or not really? I mean, do you have to like seek that out? Because one of the things I kind of push on a lot of these podcasts is that you have to, create your own destiny. If a closed mouth doesn't get fed, if you don't ask for that, if that didn't come up in conversation, like, would you have known about that?
I like the way that you put it. A closed mouth doesn't get fed. And I do think that you have to be hungry. You have to be persistent. You have to, in many ways, create your own luck or your own destiny. Some people go in with what is called an option 40 contract. So their recruiter can sign them up if they have the appropriate GT scores and all that good stuff. They can sign them up for an option 40 contract, which means that you will go from basic training to your advanced individual training. And then immediately after that, you will go to what is now Ranger Assessment and Selection Program. So that is possible on the front end, but my recruiter didn't know about it. And I know he didn't know about it. I had known the guy for 3 years. I was going to my recruiter's office in Fremont, California from the time I was probably like 14 years old until I could finally sign up. I just always knew I wanted to be a soldier. Since I have memories, I wanted to be a soldier. And so I figured I would have to walk the progression. But you know what, man, like when opportunity strikes, if you're willing, if you're hungry, if you're willing to do the work, if you're willing to attack it and get after it, then I think there's really a lot of opportunity. And what it looked like for me at that Patches building right there on Fort Benning at jump school is I literally every day I went there, like twice a day. I'd go before formation, I'd go after formation, I'd write my standard name line down, I'd slip it on pieces of paper underneath the Ranger Regiment liaison's office. I'd write my name on his chalkboard, the whole 9 yards, to the point that when I actually finally met him, he smoked the crap out of me because he's like, "Are you the guy that keeps like writing stuff all over my boards and everything?" I'm like, "Roger, Sergeant," but seemed to work because I got a chance to go.
Yeah, you're motivated, That's what they want to see. Like, yeah, they're going to harass you for it, but at the same time it's like, "Hey, you got to respect the motivation,
Yeah, for sure.
Now, do you think going right into like RASP or RIP at the time, right after boot camp or basic training and infantry school, is that a natural kind of flow, or do you think you're physically ready for that? I mean, there are guys that join the military that aren't in great shape and they leave boot camp in better shape, but not the best shape. So are you really ready for that kind of challenge?
I think you can be. I think it depends on what your background is. And most guys that end up being successful are the people who come into it with a background of physical fitness, a lot of wrestlers. I was a kickboxer, football players, people who have experienced some suffering, I would say, and know how to at least persevere a little bit through some of that. So, I mean, it's not to say that some people don't go in after getting built up. I mean, the thing now is that the one-stop unit training or one-station unit training is now 22 weeks long just for an infantryman. And back in my time when I enlisted in 1997, I think it was 11 weeks long. And so the time horizon is greater. I think that we have learned an awful lot about training and physical fitness, and so I think it can help you get a leg up, but my suggestion is that most guys who go that route are coming from some kind of a foundation where this is not new to them.
Yeah. Shared misery builds bonds,
Yes. Lifetime bonds.
Being able to be or get comfortable with being uncomfortable is something we always said, That's one of those things. Yeah. It's like, I remember being out in the field or doing some kind of training and it'd just be pouring out or whatever. And you're just like, it is what it is. Like, what am I going to do? I can sit here and complain and cry or whatever. And don't get me wrong. We all complain some.
Sure.
But like, you understand there's no one's coming to get you. So just
no one is coming.
Deal with it,
That's right.
Yeah. That's good training right there. Now going through what was, tell us about RIP, how it was like at the time. And if how it has changed, if you could give us some updates of what people could expect if they join right into the Ranger program.
Sure. So as a late 90s Ranger, the way that Ranger Indoctrination program is essentially, it was kind of like grab on to the handle on the outside of a speeding bullet train. And if you can still stay holding on after 3 weeks, then we'll give you a chance to go to a Ranger battalion. It was predominantly physical, constant smoke sessions, constant torture, if you want to call it that. It was, land navigation is a staple of it as well. So, here's a map, here's 6 points. Go basically find stop signs in the woods with no technology. All you have is your compass and a protractor and this map. And if you're not back by a certain amount of time, then you fail. If you talk to anybody on the course, then you fail. If you exchange information out on the court, you fail, all that kind of stuff. And so it was a relentless experience. And so when you pass that, you basically proved that you could keep your wits about you when things get a little bit sideways, because that's essentially what land navigation really teaches, right? Is that it tests your physical, your mental, your emotional. What are you going to do when you get stuck in a draw? Because everybody is going to get stuck in a draw. How are you going to deal when you're not sure where you are? All these kind of things. So it kind of gives you that foundation of what we're looking for in a special operator. And then you would get to your unit and it was essentially lots of training. I mean, constant training. and you were basically like the new guy for however long it took until you went to Ranger school, graduated and got your Ranger tab and came back and were a leader. And so for me, I was in the Ranger battalion as a private, and I was there 8 months. And then after 8 months, I was sent back to Fort Benning to go to Ranger school, graduated Ranger school, came back. And that's the big separator in the Ranger Regiment, is either you're a tab or a non-tab. And so if you're a non-tab, you're basically considered kind of like one of the privates. And if you're a tab, then you start to get into the junior leader ranks and progress up into sergeant, staff sergeant, so on and so forth. That is how it was up until about 2004, 2005. And what we started to experience after years of protracted combat is that it wasn't good enough to make sure that guys could do as many push-ups and flutter kicks, ruck long and find themselves out in the woods and find their way out of it. That wasn't enough, because guys were graduating from RIP and then going to meet their platoons in Bagram or BIOP and getting straight into it. And so what we started to do is, it started by adding a week in about 2004, 2005. And I was there at the Ranger Regiment Training Detachment as we were starting to make this transition, and we started to add a week of marksmanship training. We wanted to give them at least a baseline. And that has transformed over 20 years of combat. The Ranger Regiment was deployed for over 8,000 straight days after 9/11, after the towers fell, to what is now the Ranger Assessment and Selection Program, which is now an 8-week process. And the first 4 weeks is very similar to what old RIP used to be like. I mean, they're going to put it to you. You're going to do the worm workouts, which the worm is basically like a 300-pound sandbag that takes 6 dudes to, to lift. You're going to get Coal Range. Coal Range is the location that is kind of like the apex experience, where you do the land nav, you do the road marches. And, Coal Range is the place where many a dreams have been broken. And, and after you get through Coal Range, then it starts to transition a little bit into a little bit more. The second half is like preparation. And now we're doing things like marksmanship tactics, breaching, demolitions, advanced medical, things of that nature, so that by the time a young Ranger shows up to their unit, they at least have a little bit of a running start, and they can then jump straight in, because we were just straight into the rotation cycle for 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even 8 weeks is not a lot of time to get somebody ready, because if you join under a contract to become a Ranger, that means you could be downrange in 9 months or less from the time you started boot camp to now you're in country. And
that's right. I mean, we had it. Justin, we had it. I will tell you, back in 2003, on my third rotation, we got alerted. The entire 75th Ranger Regiment gets sent over to Afghanistan, and I had just received a new Ranger in my squad. So I'm talking, this guy just got back from the central issuing facility, had just gotten his boots, had just started to tie his equipment down and get his kit in order. And maybe 72 hours after this cat shows up, we get blown out. And so we're over in Afghanistan, a couple months into the trip. It was about a 2-month trip, and we're in the midst of this situation, which I'm sure you can relate. You're when you do sustained operations out in the mountains, you've got to take times to refit and rehash and plan and all this kind of stuff. And we happen to be at a pause point, and it just so happened that some lone rocketeer fired like a 1 in a million shot from across the valley, comes streaking through with an RPG, comes streaking across the sky, hits in front of our positions. And as I'm running out of the talk, screaming out orders, I was the weapons squad leader, which is the senior squad leader in the Ranger platoon. I'm screaming out fire commands, and nothing's happening. And I look over, and who's on the machine gun? The guy that just showed up. I mean, he had essentially frozen on the machine gun. And the, it was experiences like that where we had to take a hard look at ourselves and say, was it his fault, or did we put him in a bad spot where he wasn't actually ready? We didn't actually prepare this young Ranger to be successful in that moment. I mean, 6 months prior to this, he had been walking the high school graduation stage in a cap and gown. Now he's taken fire in Afghanistan. And what has he proven to us is that he can do as many flutter kicks as we can throw at him. That doesn't mean that he's really ready for prime time. And so, just to truncate that and bring it to the end, like, he ended up having a wonderful career, great guy, great Ranger, but it was experiences like that. That's one of many learning lessons that we said, okay, well, we have to do something. We have to give them some kind of a running start.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one, as a new person in the military, something, one thing I tried to tell my guys once I became like a sergeant and a staff sergeant and I was in charge of people, I would always tell them, be like, hey, listen, the new guys, they don't know what they don't know. You know what I'm saying? So like, if they show up and you ask them to do something and they just, no one's ever taught it to them, then you have to teach them. Like, you could be mad or whatever you want, but you can't expect them to show up and be the best scout observer, best JTAC, best Ford, whatever job it is, because they don't know what they don't know. They need reps and training, different scenarios. Entry level training, even as in depth as it can be, is not really enough to get especially a kid that comes right out of high school. I mean, you can attest to this. When you're in a combat arms unit, especially ones that are deploying quite a bit, you get in this mentality. It's like this fighter mentality, and what you're getting ready for, and you've been prepping for. Especially someone like you who was in the late '90s. There wasn't a lot going on, so I'm sure by the time the call came, you guys had been like itching for this for a long time.
We were hungry, man. Like, because it was like we were practicing for the big game and not playing it. And 4 years later, I mean, obviously it was a horrific situation when we were attacked, but brother, we were ready. We were ready to take it to anybody, and it was on like Donkey Kong. What we didn't realize is, going into this, everybody, your expectations are just a natural extension of your experiences in life. And the experience of our unit had been the Somalias, the Panama, the Grenadas. It was kind of like the hit it and quit it mission, right? You would get in there, you'd maybe do an airfield seizure, you'd go hard on target for 30 days, and then you're out of there, and that's it. Mm-hmm. And so when those initial deployments started unfolding, it was everybody. We thought we'd missed the war because we didn't get the objective Rhino, the October 19th jump by 3rd Ranger Battalion into Afghanistan. We were like, oh, we missed the war. Oh boy, we had no idea what was coming.
Yeah,
we just had no idea.
That's what we should have done. Go in, crush some skulls, give a little retribution for what happened and stuff like that, and get out
and leave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It turned into a mess for sure. And I think anybody that was there actively talking to the public or talking to the Afghan soldiers and stuff, you're like, this is on shaky ground at best,
Yeah, I mean, it was tough. Even in 2003, we were looking at each other saying, what are we doing? What are we doing here?
Were you guys fighting with Northern Alliance guys at that point still? Was that still a thing?
When my first rotation was in the beginning of 2002, and we had a couple of guys with us who were these dudes were like Mujahideen back when the Russian incursion was going down, and that was about all of the exposure that we had. We didn't have a whole lot of exposure. I think the ODAs were doing a lot of exposure with the Northern Alliance and guys like that. But, for us, like a Ranger platoon, a Ranger battalion, like we weren't really geared for that kind of interaction.
Yeah, you guys are supposed to be taking over airfields and stuff. Not
we're supposed
interacting
to be
with the local populace.
Yeah, direct action, close with and destroy. And what was happening a lot in those years as well is that we were doing a hell of a lot of long range patrolling, reconnaissance, route reconnaissance. We were doing lying in ambush, and it's fairly comical because when you go to Ranger school so I went to Ranger school. I graduated in March of '99. And Ranger School is a miserable experience. It's, the two levers that they use to replicate the rigors of combat are starvation and sleep deprivation. And so, you're just like, you're miserable, you're sucking, you're going through it and all this kind of stuff. And there's always that thing in the back of your mind where you're like, what are we doing here? Like, is this really like what is this preparing me for? Because I had come from a Ranger battalion, and we're doing, close quarters battle. We're doing sexy stuff, late 90s sexy version stuff. And we're like, what am I doing out here doing these like Vietnam era patrols? And then you fast forward 2002, 2003. I'm like, well, there you have it. Like, here we are starving out in the middle of nowhere. And we're clearing large grid, or clearing like grid squares, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. I know quite a few, I wouldn't say quite a few, I guess quite a few Marines that have gone to Ranger School, and they all, said that it was a good learning opportunity. Even the ones that didn't graduate. There were a few guys that hold a chip on their shoulder. They think that the instructors were being harder on them for some stuff because they were Marines. And I was like, I don't know, man, maybe. I've never been so. There's definitely, you hear that a lot though, like, oh, they didn't like the Marines that were there, or they didn't like,
oh my gosh,
they're tab protectors, and that is, I think, is what they call them.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is that there were Marine Ranger instructors there, and it was really cool. Actually, let's tell this quick story here. So it's the end of Ranger School. Ranger School unfolds in 3 phases. You have the Darby phase, which is right there at Fort Benning. You have Mountain phase, which is up in Dahlonega, and then you have Swamp phase, or Florida phase, which is down in like Eglin Air Force Base area. And so you have to get a go in each graded. You have to get a go at a major graded position in each phase in order to progress forward, right? Mm-hmm. So it's constantly being placed in different leadership positions, and you get assessed. You're the platoon leader, you're the platoon sergeant, squad leader, all this different kind of stuff. And it's binary. You either go or no go. And so there I am. Mind you, I went to Ranger School. I was 19 years old, right? And I'm in Ranger School. I'm in Florida phase. It's the last patrol. I don't have my go, so I've already failed a graded patrol, and so I'm like, oh shit, like I'm screwed, right? And I'm sitting there, and the way it works is in the morning is they call in the Ranger instructors, call everybody in, they assign new roles and all that kind of stuff. So they're going through and assigning roles, and they assign this guy. So my squad, I'm like, okay, it's down to the last person. Am I going to get a grade? They assign it to somebody else. And this guy, and I'm just like, shit, I'm screwed. Like, I'm going to have to recycle Florida phase. I am sucking. This is miserable. And I start to hear this like kerfuffling going on right next to, like over between the guy that had been placed into the leadership position and the major patrol leader, the Ranger instructor. His name was Sergeant First Class Healy. I'll never forget him. He was a Ranger reconnaissance guy. And so he's talking and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, yeah, Sergeant, I got to get my eye checked out, something, yada, yada, yada. And he's like, well, what's wrong with your eye? I don't know, something's wrong with my eye. I just need to go see the medic. And he's just like, okay, well, drop your gear and you're heading back to the rear. And the guy's like, no, I just need a medic to give me like some eye drops or something. Like, it's like, sorry, Ranger, life, limb, or eyesight. You got to go back to the rear. Drop your gear right there. Now, this is the last day for a graded patrol. And this poor guy, drops his gear. Now, mind you, he had in a previous phase gotten his orbital bone crushed from, he had tried to do Ranger School before in the boxing, you do boxing in Darby phase, and somebody crushed his orbital bone. So I understand why the guy had some concerns. And I understand also why the Ranger instructor was like, hey, you got to go back in, kid. So I overhear all of this, and I sprint from the line over to the Ranger instructor, because this cat he's gone. He's moving out, going to the Jeep. I run over there. I'm like, hey, Sergeant, I can't help but notice that you need a squad leader for this last graded patrol, and I need a graded patrol. He looks down. He's like, what's your roster number? Who are you? And he looks down. He looks at me. He's like, you think you got it, kid? And I was just like, Roger, Sergeant. And he's like, okay, get to it. And then everybody gets an assigned Ranger instructor. And mine was Gunnery Sergeant Parker, Gunny Parker, badass Marine, like, Marine recon, like the full 9 yards. This dude was, I mean, like, this guy would walk in and the presence was like, whoa, this dude is like no joke. And that was my last graded patrol. And you had to do this like long, it's called, if you don't do the Weaver, you do something called the Widmarsh 500. It was the winter, so you couldn't go into the swamps. So you basically road march the whole patrol back in around the swamps. And I'm running up and down trying to get my go and this and that. And we get to the end of this thing and I'm spent. I got nothing left. And, everyone drops a gear. Everything is over. We're back in the barracks. And Gunny Parker pulls me over and he says, well, what do you think? Do you think you did what it takes to pass, young? And I was like, Roger, Sergeant, Roger Gunny. And he's like, yeah, you did. He's like, hey, I just want you to know you earned this. I'm not giving you a go because it's the last day and I like you. I do like you, but you did earn it. I'm just like, hooah or hoorah, whatever, Gunny. Thank you. But he made such an impression on me, man. Like he was awesome.
That's awesome. That's good. That's what, as a Marine, that's what we want. You always hear, and you know what I'm talking about as a soldier too, and things that happen. You hear a lot of times you only hear the negative stuff in the news. Former Marine killed his family, or former Marine robbed a store, or a Ranger, blah blah blah.
Former Ranger robs a bank.
Yeah, it's like, man, we don't really want to be known for that. Like, we want to be like professional, like be known as professionals, And yeah, I really enjoyed the Marine Corps, and that's the kind of attitude for a lot of these units, you have to have an attitude like that. Like, be professional and be kind of hardcore about it, because jobs like that, Marine recon, jobs like what you're doing, those are real life and death, jobs. Like, there's actual life and death. And that's something I've talked about on the show and explained to people after I've gotten out. Sometimes it's hard to take things serious out in the real world because, oh no, so-and-so didn't get the email in time, or, oh no, blah, blah, blah. And when you've come from a situation where you're like experiencing actual life and death, everything else just seems mundane. And you're like, why is everyone freaking out about this situation right now? Like, what do you guys,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally appreciate that. When I got out of the Army in 2009, I got into the commercial side of healthcare. So I was representing a cancer diagnostics laboratory, and we happened to be, the company was kind of early adopters at seeking and hiring veteran talent. And one of the things that the guys and I would say to each other, because the truth is that it was a hard ass job, and there's a lot of hard jobs out there. And one of the things that we would do is we would call each other as we're, riding around and getting our teeth kicked in by prospective clients and just say, well, at least nobody's shooting at us today.
Yeah.
We just keep saying that over and over again. Nobody's shooting at us today. And I think that I talk to a lot of veterans about this, that we really have the opportunity to help others gain a little bit of perspective if we approach it from a place of, I would say, caring and connection. It's very easy for us to put our walls up and be like, I'm a badass veteran and you'll never understand and this and that. But the truth is that nobody holds a monopoly on hardship or adversity or suffering. There's some really hard stuff going on out there. When we instead use our stories to build bridges instead of walls, I think people really appreciate that about us. They really appreciate the calm that we can bring. They really appreciate the perspective and just say, hey, I can appreciate where you're coming from. We had some really hard things that we had to deal with, and, where are you at right now? What are you feeling? I think a lot of people can appreciate that if we find ways to relate to others, as opposed to, kind of the 1,000-meter stare. I'm kind of basically like untouchable.
Or guys that take on that like disgruntled veteran persona.
Can't stand that.
It's like, come on, man. No, I agree, and I talked about this again earlier in another podcast episode. I was responding to a Reddit comment. Someone mentioned on Reddit, on one of the subreddits, about how do you respond when someone asks about your service or something like that. And so many people were like, I don't talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. They don't need to hear about it. And I'm like, yeah, I kind of get that. But at the same time, veterans will complain a lot about how civilians don't understand them and that they're not getting the treatment they should get, or they shouldn't get the, there's not things being highlighted that need to be highlighted. But at the same time, they don't want to tell anybody what their experiences were like. You know what I'm saying? It's like, how can you expect them to relate to you if you won't even tell them what you did? And I'm not saying you need to go into the inner depths of every thing you've ever done or experienced or anything like that. But I personally think we owe it to the sons and daughters of Americans that are sending their kids in the military to explain to them what really happens while you're in the military. I think we owe it to American taxpayers for them to know what is their tax money is being spent on. I'm not saying that we should, that isn't me saying that there's something wrong with how we're spending it, but they should know this is what missions actually look like. This is what guys are actually going and doing. And we're so, because of no draft and stuff like that, we're so out of touch. Like the American populace as a whole is so out of touch. I mean, I remember when those Green Berets were killed in Africa, and people were like, "We're in Africa?" And I'm like, "Yeah." There's like, I mean, I know they don't advertise it themselves, obviously, but at the same time, it's not like it was a huge national secret. And it's like, there's just stuff like that happening all over the world that people don't even realize. And I think they deserve to know. You know what I'm saying?
I do know what you're saying. I agree with you, Justin. The way I look at it is that as veterans, we represent 7% of the U.S. population. And so if you're going to tell me that the only people that you're going to connect with is a very small subset of the U.S. population when, as a veteran, after you get out, then I'm going to tell you that you are loading the box for failure. That's what you're doing. You're setting yourself up for a very big failure, because the way that I think about it is that if I only talk to the guys that I served with, they live all over the United States of America. We're all distributed, right? We all end up coming together, and then we all end up kind of going our separate ways. If I only talk to those guys, if they're the only ones who can relate to me, what about the first community that's closest to me that is desperately trying to relate to me, including my wife, my children, my family, my mom, my brother, my sister? If I don't ever give people the chance, then I'm just setting myself up for failure through that isolation. And nothing good is born of isolation.
Yeah.
Nothing. And that's why, after I spent time in healthcare, so the co-author of our book, Perseverance is Greater Than Endurance, Blaine Smith, he and I are business partners. He was the executive director of a nonprofit called Team Red, White, and Blue, Team RWB. He was the first employee, and he conned me into joining him. He didn't con me. He just called me up and was like, "Hey, man, what do you think about, leaving that nice corporate job you got, taking a 60% pay cut and helping us raise money for veterans?" And that's a big thing of what we did, is we helped 150,000 veterans reconnect to over 200 cities across the United States by kindling this using physical and social activity to connect people. So it's culturally authentic experience. What do we do in the military? We do PT together. We go for runs, we go for hikes, we do yoga, whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Get together for over a cup of coffee, have a meal, all that kind of stuff together. And we were inclusive of our civilian counterparts by design, because we would tell people all the time, how are you going to reintegrate into your community if you only talk to people who once wore a uniform? And so what would happen is like, we get people out there doing things together, right? Let's say we're out on a hike together, and halfway through the hike, you see these two chopping it up the whole time. And, the veteran says, "Oh, hey, by the way, when did you serve?" And the other person says like, "Oh, I actually never served in the military." And it's like, like their brain just like explodes. Just like, wait a minute. You mean to tell me that I just had a meaningful connection with somebody who never served in the military? Well, hold on a second now.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, yeah, brother, like that's humanity, man. Like far more connects you than divides you. Just give them a chance. I'm not saying to like go out there and just start puking your story all over the place. In fact, please don't, because that's more than anything a defense mechanism showing everybody that you're trying to push them away. But
Trying
I am
to scare
saying,
people almost.
Yeah. Like just give people a chance. Start small. Start with your family. Start with your friends from high school or whatever. Just give people a chance, because you're giving yourself a chance.
Yeah, it's weird for sure. And it's hard for people on the outside to understand, but it's like, some of these guys, you know, you live with them, you work with them, you go to the gym with them, you eat with them for years, you know,
Yeah.
and it's literally like living with a brother or brothers, you know, and sometimes sisters. And it's hard to replicate that bond. And I think that's why a lot of guys have issues when they get out. They're looking for something that was like that, you know, that bond without all the bullshit of the military.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm always like, you got to get into something. You got to find a hobby that you're really into and just kind of dive into it. And really, you know, that's what you're looking for. You know, that's what you need is like something outside of your, I mean, it can be a job, I guess, if you're starting a business or something like that. But, you know, maybe outside of that, you should have something where it's just a cool hobby that, you know, try to find like-minded people in that sector of the world. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Get engaged in some way. I totally agree with you.
yeah, man. So again, like I said, people should definitely share their stories, do that, and let people know because it's important. And in the spirit of that, we'll get back to when you're at Rangers. Can you kind of explain? Ranger Regiment has a lot of different breakouts of like you have like Ranger Reconnaissance. There's like there's different platoons. There's different jobs. Can you kind of give us an overview of Ranger Regiment as a whole? There's different jobs that they do. Who does those jobs? And then let's talk about your first deployment and how that went.
Sure. Yeah, so the 75th Ranger Regiment is the U.S. military's premier direct action raid force. We do certain subspecialties like airfield seizures, for example, and other direct action raids. And essentially what you have as a Ranger Regiment is a fully self-sustaining strike force or unit that can go and deploy and conduct these kind of missions. And so everybody who is in the 75th Ranger Regiment has passed Ranger assessment and selection, from cooks to mechanics to personnel clerks, all the way down to door kickers, the line, and then it breaks out into different subspecialties. But at its core, what the Ranger Regiment is broken down into is 4 battalions. So you have 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Ranger Battalion. 1st Battalion is at Hunter Army Airfield, Georgia. 2nd Ranger Battalion is at Joint Base Lewis McChord, and that's where I went and grew up in. 3rd Ranger Battalion is at Fort Benning, Georgia. And then the 4th Battalion is the Ranger Special Troops Battalion. Actually, I think it's now called the RMIB, Ranger Military Intelligence Battalion. And that has its own subspecialty. Within all of that, you have other breakouts. You mentioned reconnaissance. So there's a Ranger Reconnaissance Company. This is the premier reconnaissance surveillance organization in JSOC. They're doing incredible stuff and have grown so much over the last 25 years. But at its base, it's really the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd battalions that are out there conducting those direct action missions. And so when you take a battalion, break that down into essentially 4 companies, and you have those companies: Alpha Company, Bravo, Charlie. There's a headquarters company. It has fluctuated over the years. At times there has been a Delta company and an Echo company. My information is a little bit dated in this regard because it has fluctuated. But what those companies, if you just take a basic company, like when I deployed to combat, Charlie Company, 2nd Ranger Battalion, I was in 1st Platoon, which is the Mad Slashers. That's a 40 man element, right? And you have 4 of those within a company that go out and can conduct raids. They can conduct, ambushes. They can do a whole lot of different things. But at its core, you have these kind of 2 worlds, especially back in my day. We had our feet in 2 worlds. You had elite light infantry and then special operations force. And as the war progressed, we tilted deeper and deeper and deeper into the special operations side of the world of our existence, as opposed to the infantry kind of stuff. And so, kind of letting my story kind of unfold here. So I was a staff sergeant by the time September 11th came around. So I was a squad leader of a 9-man Ranger assault squad. And I also happened to be engaged to be married, and I was supposed to be married in December of 2001. Kelly's mother had cancer. She went home on hospice care on September 12th, 2001. She had a day of clarity. 5 days later, we got married on September 17th. She died 2 days later. I deployed about a week after that over to Jordan. And so it was a pre-planned deployment. We would go over and support the training of Jordanian Rangers. But once the towers fell, everything was on the table. It was on like Donkey Kong, and we were the closest to the fight. We had the Joint Special Operations package there with us. We were doing training jumps with, which may or may not have turned into what the air mission validation was for Objective Rhino, because when you're out there and you're doing airborne operations and training, you never jump with live rounds. And we're out there on the outskirts of Amman, Jordan, jumping with live rounds, doing these kind of training missions. We're like, okay, we think it's about to go down. And it did go down, but it was 3rd Ranger Battalion, October 19th, Objective Rhino. Yeah, that's exactly how we felt. We were just like sons of bitches.
Got the old rug pulled on you.
Yeah, I got the rug pulled out from under us, man. We were pissed. And so we go home, and then a couple months later, we got our first taste of it. So I deployed to Afghanistan then in April of 2002. I should mention, after the Objective Rhino mission, I'm still over in Amman, Jordan. I get to call home for the first time. I finally get a hold of my wife. It's been about a month, and she says, I'm pregnant. I said, of course you're pregnant.
Of course.
9 months later, when I'm over in Afghanistan, I'm listening to my son being born from a satellite phone while they're in Seattle, and I'm in Bagram, Afghanistan. And so that was the beginning of my war experience, which it kind of, you blow that out. And I was around for about 3 of the first 36 months of our marriage. And it was just a really, really difficult way to start a family.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you had a lot of life things happening all at one time there. That's, that's reality though. It's a lot of pressure, and the hard part about the military, especially when you're talking about a unit like the Rangers or something like that, is that when a mission comes up, you want to go. And it's like you've been doing all this training and everything's going on. And deep down, it's not what's best for your family, but that it is what's best for your desire to do this, one, and probably good for your career. I mean, I don't think a lot of guys think about it like that, but you don't want to be the guy that didn't get to deploy.
100%, man. 100%. And these are the tough things. So now, mind you, I got married. I was 22 years old. I became a father at 23 years old. And to
experience.
your point, Justin, like I'm looking at it, I'm saying, when we knew we got the call to deploy, my platoon sergeant met me in the hallway and he said, I know Kelly's pregnant. We need you. Wasn't even a second. I said, I'm going. Oh, I'm going.
Duh, yeah.
Yeah. Like I was going to be damned if I wasn't going to lead my Rangers in combat. That's all I ever wanted. And the truth is like, I thought that's what my story was going to be, that I was going to go out and hail a gunfire. That's just the way I always saw my story going. I was raised in a pretty chaotic home. My dad, when he was around, was a really sick guy, and it created just a really toxic environment. He took off on us when I was 11, and all of that kind of exacerbated. You become a kid who's just trying to figure it out. You look around you and you have all these other families that seem like everybody's happy and perfect, and you're one of the kids that was left behind by your dad. And I was like, okay, great, I know what I'm good for. Like I'm gonna go. I can go protect their ability to have a safe and loving environment. I'm angry anyways. I've always been overly aggressive anyways. I've always been the kid who was getting into fights, almost getting expelled from elementary school, all of these different kind of things. And I'm like, yeah, no problem. Like, I'll get into it. So confronted with this decision, right? Which, whether it was a decision or not, is really quite irrelevant, frankly, because I had already in my heart and in my mind made that determination. Yeah. And so what did I do is I said, hell yeah, I'm going. You kidding me? Like, I'm going to go freaking, I'm going to go get after it. Like, this is what I have been training for. This is what my whole life has been aiming for. And then what did I do? I went home and, Kelly wringing her hands, like, did you talk to them? Like, are they going to be able, what's going to happen? I'm just like, sorry, babe, duty calls. Nothing I can do about it.
Yeah. I mean, and there is an element that for sure where the military owns you. Like if I tell you to be here at this day and this time, you're going to be there. Like you have to. There's no.
That's right.
But I will say they are sometimes, not always, understanding like what you're talking about when they know there's a lot of the life things happening, and they really need to ask, because if your mind isn't there, if you're not ready for that, if you're focused on all these, because you had all kinds of stuff going on, if you have all this other stuff going on, are you ready to do this? Can we? It's like, can we? You're not going to become a liability at some point, like.
Yeah. Is your head in the game? Or is
sure.
your head going to be at home with your new wife who just lost her mother and who is pregnant and whose father is off the reservation because he just lost his wife of 30 years? Where is your head at, in all of this? And so, yes, I think he asked, and I think he mostly asked out of courtesy with already knowing what the destination was going to be. But I had already known the destination. And I think that, Justin, both things are true here, right? Like I did have a responsibility to my Rangers. I did have a responsibility to my unit. I also had a responsibility to my new wife. I also had a responsibility to this child that, we were bringing into the world. And, like it was difficult. I don't know any other way to say it other than my head was already down that rabbit hole of like, I got to do this. Like, I got to go lead people in combat. And I didn't have, I think, the moral courage at the time to go home and be honest with my wife. And so I lied to her. And that was a lie that stayed buried for 17 years, brother. 17 years I maintained that lie. Nope, it wasn't my choice. It wasn't my choice. It wasn't my choice. And meanwhile, being a kid whose dad took off on him, last thing I wanted to be as a dad was absent. It's the first thing I was. And I chose it. And so now, we talk about like the conundrum that occurs here. This is where quite a bit of the work that I had done when I was in Denver Seminary, getting a Master's of Divinity in Leadership, was thinking through these ideas of moral injury. There's a certain wound upon the soul when you as a human being make decisions that are not fully in keeping with your moral compass, so to speak, or where there are not clear black and white answers, because most of the world is quite gray, and you don't know if you can trust the way that you make those decisions in the world. And so I think that much more is becoming known about moral injury, and I think we're doing a fairly good job at talking about that a little bit more, because it is uniquely different from PTSD. But all to say, you go back to that, that's what my first deployment looked like.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's a lot going on. I will say, I remember a lot in the Marine Corps, they spoke, especially before deployments, the old mantra, keep your honor clean kind of deal. And it was like, you don't want to go out there and accidentally blow up a house that had a family in it, or you don't want to accidentally go out there and kill a kid, like this thought that I think regular people have, that you're just like these bloodlust killers out there just killing everything, is definitely not true. And most of it is because like we're all humans. And I mean, there are psychos in the military, just like there are in every other industry in the world. But most of us have feelings and morals, and would feel absolutely horrible if something we did, caused harm to like a kid or an innocent civilian that was, not doing anything. At the same time, feel nothing when you cause harm to a guy that's legitimately a bad guy. I remember we smoked a dude with a HIMARS rocket that was emplacing an IED, and they told us afterwards, they're like, yeah, that was the guy we found out through forensics, that's the guy who emplaced the IED that hit Lieutenant so-and-so, who had to get medevaced out of country. And I'm like, fuck that dude, like I had zero qualms about that,
I think I appreciate you bringing this into these kind of discussions, because I think far far fewer conversations on this are being had than they need to be. I think we need to be actually talking about this a little bit more, and go back to where we started here with just connecting with our fellow Americans who never served. Is it's like people want to hear the high intensity quote unquote war story, but I think what they need to hear is they need to hear about all the times that we didn't pull the trigger. They need to hear about all those difficult decisions that were being made in split second moments.
Mm-hmm.
They need to hear about, those, that long uh, 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 vehicle convoy, that long convoy that we were on from Asadabad to Gardez, moving a bunch of gun trucks where, middle of the night, we come rolling into a town and all you see is a figure running out of a little building with an AK-47 running up. And, one of the guys has got it, beating in on that person. And they need to hear that it actually was just a child running out forward. Here, take this AK-47. Like, we're not enemy. And the restraint that our NCOs and that our Rangers had instead of pulling the trigger on a thing like that, that's the real story. Those are the far more common stories that I think people need to hear and that we need to be sharing, because I totally agree with you, man. Like, yeah, maybe there's a couple of psychos out there, whatever. But most of the people are just, they're just normal people that are trying their hardest to do something good in the world, serve their country, protect their country, see others who are being in states of oppression, liberate them from those states of oppression, and do good things in the world. And that's, when the whole debacle, our botched withdrawal from Afghanistan happened, I'm sure that you, just like me, had a ton of conversations with other veterans where we had to remind ourselves, hey, the policies, we have nothing to do with that. The decisions that are made, we have nothing to do with that. What you had something to do with was you kept your honor clean, as you said. I love that term. I had never heard that before, but you kept your honor clean. You did the right thing. You closed with and you engaged when you needed to, and you didn't engage when you needed not to. You can hold your head high knowing that you made a difference in those scenarios. And I think that what doesn't help is when you get this this crescendo of noise where people just think that, oh yeah, you guys were just a bunch of bloodlust savages. No, you don't actually understand the way it went down. And you probably don't understand why guys are having such a hard time. Guys and gals are having such a hard time with this withdrawal, because we're all looking at each other saying, like, what was it all for? What did I do? What happened?
Yeah, well, a couple things there. One, I can't believe you've never heard that. Keep your honor clean. I think that came up every time we discussed ROEs, the rules of engagement in the Marines.
Oh, not in the Rangers. Ours was choose the hard right over the easy wrong.
Yeah, same. I think part of the problem that the general public has is, one, you're right. They see these stories of like big social media influencers, military influencers, these SEALs, these guys that have done crazy stuff, and then they attribute that to everybody. Like, everybody was in the military, so that stuff must have happened to them. And then also, like, battles like Fallujah, happen, and there's so much footage from like Fallujah around, and they think that's the norm, and that's definitely not the norm.
Not the norm.
It's most of it is boredom. Most of it is just walking around,
yes,
waiting for something to happen, or seeing
one dry hole after another, compound assault after compound assault after dry hole, and you're like, what the hell? Damn it.
Yeah, and then rules of engagement, something that's always kind of, for me, as being a JTAC and knowing the stringent rules of engagement I had while I was in Afghanistan, it's always baffling to me. Like, in the media, they make it sound like we're just slinging hellfires all over the place and bombing. And I'm like, man, you don't understand the process of getting that approved. Even in a dynamic situation, I'm sending it up. If I'm on the ground and I'm radioing something in, I'm sending it up. And then my air officer is reviewing it, and the fires chief is reviewing it, all the targeting information and everything to verify everything's good. I was the targeting chief for 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines, and we done tons of missions. Every time there was a target that came up, I put it into Piss Off, which is some targeting software for those that don't know, and I'm confirming the location of where they're about to strike, and I'm also confirming that there's nothing on the no strike list. And there's buildings, you'll see little red circles all over the map of things that can't be blown up, mosques, schools, stuff like that. They can be if something crazy is happening, like you're taking a lot of fire.
Taking fire from a mosque, yeah.
But in general, unless guys are really pinned down and dying, then you're not going to touch those. And it just, in the media, they make it sound like we're just slinging these things all over the place. And then, depending on the ordinance, I may not even get approval of it. Someone up higher may need to, because of, hey, it's too close to this mosque, or hey, it's in this person's area of operations or whatever. You know, it's like, it's just, I just don't think people really understand, you know, what actually goes into it. And again, accidents happen, unfortunately. It's combat. Yeah. You know, things are going to happen that's unintentional and stuff like that. And there are bad people in the military, just like you can't name a profession that doesn't have a subset of bad people in it. It's unfortunate. We try to do a good job of weeding it out, but, you know, obviously that happens. And then there was one other thing I was going to say. What were we talking about? Oh, you had a good point I was going to add on to. But either way, yeah, I think all that's important. I think the general public needs to know that stuff, and that it's good that people talk about it. Was
it about the post-withdrawal from Afghanistan?
Post-withdrawal from Afghanistan. Yeah. I was less affected by that than a lot of people, because I was an Afghan advisor in 2013 in Sangin, and we were the last advisor team, and that was a pretty contentious area. I mean, a lot of people know about Sangin, 5th Marines, 7th Marines, the Brits. You know, a lot of guys were killed in Sangin. A lot of guys were maimed by IEDs and stuff like that. And we were there as part of the Afghan National Army advisor team, going down to the companies and doing missions with them and stuff like that. And we were the last ones, and we knew, I mean, when we left, we were like, hey, we were trying to like turn things over. Like, we wouldn't do all their medevacs for them. You know, it had to be essentially life, limb, or eyesight. And maybe even then we may not do the medevac, depending on the situation, because it's like, we want you to exercise your capabilities because we're leaving. And it made it a weird deployment. But after we left and the Afghan army took that over, I think like, I want to say less than a year later, one of the guys that I was on that advisor team with sent me a YouTube video that, or maybe it was on Live Leak, I don't remember, but it was the Sangin Bazaar, and it was just like a ghost town with tumbleweeds because ISIS had rolled in there and just taken it over. And it was like, so for me, when everything went down at the end, I'm like, I already went through all this, because the place we went and fought and did our thing, you know, with the Afghans. And then that also led me to believe, like, when they said, hey, when we pulled out, hey, we think they're going to last 4 to 6 weeks. And I'm like, yeah, no way. It's 4 to 6 days, you know, like, it's just, anybody that's worked with the Afghans knew, and it's not necessarily their fault. Undermanned, underarmed, a lot of corruption, you know, a lot of things went into that, but so I wasn't necessarily affected.
Yeah. I think that I had done quite a bit of, you know, healing, if you want to call it that, and still, you know, healing journey, I perceive will last for the rest of my days, and that is just fine. And I think that I think there was a lot of guys that really hadn't engaged in any of the healing process, and it really hit them quite hard. I mean,
ripped the wound open.
Within a week of, you know, seeing all those images, you know, people hanging on planes and all that crazy crap going on. 2 of my former Rangers had died. One by an alcohol-related incident that, you know, I can't say whether or not. All I can say, alcohol-related incident. He died. Another guy by suicide. And you look at that kind of stuff, and you're just like, you know, this is where, like, we don't need any public Monday morning quarterbacking of any things. And, you know, frankly, what these guys need right now is just a little bit of compassion and reminding that, you know, like, look, you know, you're you did the best that you could do. And, you did everything that you could do. You kept your honor clean. You're a good man. You did the best that you could. And it's devastating, but, you look at all the friends that we lost in Afghanistan, and you can understand why, you wake up one day, you see that stuff unfolding on the TV screen, then you have all this narrative where it's just so like lopsided and makes you feel like you're a villain. And if you're isolated and you've lost perspective and you're, on the brink of losing hope, you can understand how, it gets really dark really quick. I'm not excusing it, but I'm just saying you can understand how guys go that road. And so what we need to do is just, be the best that we can be. We can't save anybody. Like, I'm nobody's savior. You're nobody's savior, but we can love other people and just take care of them and, be good friends and just try to add some perspective and remind, like, hey man, like that's what happened over there right now and what's happening, by political decision. That's not something that we'd have to talk about. Let's just talk about how we're connected and we always will be.
Yeah. I've never actually had any conversations like that with anybody that I served with. Well, okay, that's not true. I guess there's like two guys that I'm in like a group chat with that we're just always kind of messaging each other. But guys that I served with that I talk to occasionally, like I'll reach out or they'll reach out to me. That's almost always just, hey man, how you been? And then like maybe a couple minutes of each of us catching up, and then we start telling the old stories again and harassing each other. And I like that none of my friends are like talking about the politics, because that's it's so divisive in the country and everything. And it's just like, yeah, like you said, let's just talk about, the shared misery and things that made us like, friends and bond forever kind of deal. People got to reach out. I mean, that's all the other BS, like people want more money into the VA for suicide prevention and things. And I'm like, I don't know what it's getting us. Like, I don't know. I think people really, the biggest thing that could help them is just their friends from serving together, reaching out to each other occasionally, calling to say what's up, text and say what's up. I think there should, obviously, I think there should be help within the VA, but I mean, I remember being in the military and how many suicide classes are you going to sit through? And it's like, okay, man, I got the signs, I got this, I got the symptoms, I understand. In my opinion, unfortunately, I just had another friend commit suicide a couple days ago, Andrew Dissinger, man. He was a good dude, good JTAC guy, forward observer. And I just don't know what you can do if someone's set on that. You know what I'm saying? Other than just be present.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sadly, just Easter Sunday, we had a ranger here in Colorado in our community, Mac Cathcart, killed himself. And, I just had coffee and breakfast with a couple of close ranger buddies, and we were just literally having this conversation, Justin. And I believe that, and this isn't the first ranger buddy that I've lost to suicide. This is now the third, actually. And when I look at it, I think we have to acknowledge that there is a level of sickness, darkness, evil. There is a depth that we do not understand that some people are experiencing. And we cannot necessarily transform that or heal that or solve that. But what we can do is we can be supportive of our brothers and sisters. We can reach out to them. We can include them. We can remind them that they are of infinite worth and all of these things. I think we can do that, but we also need to hold that intention with the reality that for some people, there is some very dark stuff going on there that we do not understand.
Yeah.
And I think we look for the signs. We, have the, conversation, ask the question, are you thinking of suicide? If they say yes, okay, can I help you get connected to some resources? When I was at Team Red, White, and Blue, we did these safe talk trainings that were all over the United States where we equipped leaders to have that very simple conversation to get people to the right resources. We can do all that. We should do all that. I
Mhm.
think we should do all that, but I think we also need to recognize we just don't know what's going on inside people's heads
For
and
sure.
inside their hearts.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw a quote the other day. It was like, I hope you're winning the battle you don't tell anyone about. And I was like, ooh, that's deep, you know?
Yeah. Well, and the other thing about that too, Justin, is like, look, tell the truth.
Yeah, for
Tell the
sure.
truth. You know, like when one of your buddies asks you, "Hey man, how you doing? How you doing really?"
Yeah.
Tell the truth. Like I'm not okay. I'm not good. Okay. Thank you.
It's hard to do that though, you know?
It is hard to
It's
do
hard
that.
for guys and girls or a lot of people to open up because in the military you're not wanting to show any signs of weakness, right? And because that's how you, I don't know, it's just like a perception that you put off. There's no signs of weakness here. I'm ready to do my job. I'm ready to go to the next level if you're ready to have me. You know, for people that are really like into their job and want to keep moving up, you know, especially in the special operations community, I'm sure there's schools that you're dying to get to. There's training that you want to get on. But if you show these perceived signs of weakness, you may be afraid that they're not going to send you. Oh, he's got
Right.
this thing going on, so we're going to send him here while his team goes and does this. You know,
That's 100% right, Justin. In the special operations community, it is a zero defect environment where you are expected to be indomitable. That is the culture. And the thing about it is, when you leave that culture, and most of us leave by our own choice, some people don't leave by choice, but either way, when you get off that train, there has to be an acknowledgement, or I would encourage an acknowledgement that you don't have to be that guy anymore. You don't have to self preserve. You don't have to manage your reputation in that regard. And I think that what happens is that people continue to manage their reputation and they don't actually tell the real story and they don't actually share what's really going on inside their heart. And meanwhile, they're out there drinking their face off, drinking their life away alone in their apartment because they just lost their family, they got a divorce, all the things that we've seen happen over and over and over again in our community. And you're like, brother, I get it, like, but you know, you don't have to act like a ranger in your 20s anymore. We're in our 40s, man. Like, let's can we go back? And I think, you know, you talk about this like in terms of whether you want to look at it in terms of frameworks of like the hero's journey or whatever, is like, you know, a lot of us have gotten out and we can go back to our community and connect with these guys and talk to them and say, hey, like it just doesn't have to be that way. And, you know, one of the organizations that I'm involved with, I serve on the board of directors of the Gallant Few, and we do the Ranger for Life program. And this is so amazing. I wish I had had this when I got out, because so 12 months prior to guys and gals separating, they go in there and they connect one-on-one with all these people and say, okay, let's start thinking about what your plan's going to be in 12 months before you get out, because I want to make sure that you understand there's a whole community of rangers out here waiting to support you. There's a whole community of people rooting for you. We have programs, we have services, we have all the things. Let's get you connected and let's actually get you moving forward in your life. Because what I think happens, unfortunately, is too many of us get stuck in a brain space that we were in from maybe 18 to 22 or 24, in that I have to be indomitable, I have to be zero defect. And then we get out of the military for whatever reason we get out. Most of the time people get out because it's a choice. You know, you said earlier, and I think you're about right, like people don't want to deal with the bullshit anymore. But we're so over identified with that lifestyle. Like I have to be ranger, everything is ranger, this and that, you know, it's tattooed on my back, I wear stuff that says ranger all the time. And you just keep putting the walls up, but you don't actually tell the truth when your buddy calls you and says, hey man, like I'm kind of worried about you, like you doing okay? Can't help but notice last time we hung out that you kind of just kept drinking. Like, if you're not okay, say you're not okay. If you can't do it with your ranger buddy, for God's sakes, who can you do it with?
yeah. No, I understand. I mean, but again, you're talking about a group of people that not easily going to divulge any weaknesses, you know, no matter how far away. There's some people that are just never going to talk, and that's unfortunate because, some things you got a voice. I mean, I think this is something else I always give advice to. I'm like, even if you don't want to talk to someone, write it down, like journal it, because that's so important to just like get some stuff out. Just like getting it out is probably like, there's probably stuff that people are holding on to. It's like, even if you don't want to come on a podcast or you don't want to like tell the stories to other people or something like that, write it down. Not only is it like a mechanism to kind of maybe deal with it or whatever, or just kind of revisit it, maybe rethink about it. But if you write it down, maybe someone in your family, and think about 100 years from now, someone finding these handwritten stories. I believe, I think I remember you kept a journal, correct?
I did.
Exactly. I mean, how valuable is that to your family to know, especially because you were in some of the first waves after 9/11 going in and doing these things. So, I mean, can you tell us about when you started that journal, why you started it, and then maybe some of the like key moments you think are in that you want to divulge, obviously.
Yeah, for sure. So I've always been a writer in some context. I think that I didn't realize how much I needed that catharsis to get it out, because I'm constantly processing. It never stops up here. And so what I didn't realize back then, but I'm glad that I did it, is that it actually helped me. It actually helped kind of me manage, my energy, for lack of a better term. And so I had it from my very first deployment, as I felt like it would be valuable for me just to reflect on what I was seeing and what was going on. And so I always carried a little notebook in my left sleeve pocket in a little plastic bag that says, "In case of death, give to my wife." And I wanted to write down what I was thinking, things about like, wishing that I was at home, missing my wife. And I did not realize how powerful that actually would be. A couple months ago, my kids and I were sitting. I have adult kids now. My son is 22. My daughter's 20. And my daughter, Ellie, she said, read one of those things out, like pull it out and read it. And I was just like, okay. I'm like, yeah, sure. And, it sits up on this shelf right behind me. And I pulled it out and I just read 2 pages, and it was actually from Jordan. And it had said something to the effect of, I just found out that I'm going to be a father and I'm not there. I feel like the lowest of low right now. I feel like dirt, but oh my gosh, we're going to have a baby together. And I look over at my daughter. I mean, brother, I had read like this much from a little spiral notebook, and she's just crying.
Yeah.
She was like, "Oh my gosh, that is so sweet." And it was just a gift that I had no idea. I just kind of did it.
Just passing thoughts, at the time, or just like passing thoughts become like a thing like that. Yeah. No, I encourage people to do that. I started one when I started my first deployment, and then I just didn't keep up with it, and I really regret it. I think I got on that first deployment, I just got so frustrated with stuff that I just kind of like went internal and didn't stop, which I should have kept writing stuff down, really.
Well, that's exactly the same thing as I started writing stuff. I started writing about how pissed off I was. I would write things like, "What the fuck are we doing here?" I would.
This is when you're in Jordan?
No, this is in Afghanistan now. So I carried it with me. Jordan, every deployment I did overseas, I had it with me. And so I ended up doing 4 rotations to Afghanistan. And going back to, those early war periods, on my second rotation, so we deployed day after Christmas 2002. And the way the JSOC rotations would go is that you would do about 3 months, and then you would come back. So about 100 days is actually what it was.
Mm-hmm.
So faster rotation cycle, shorter rotations, higher operational tempo was kind of the conceptual model of it. And so we're out there. It's March of 2003. We're supposed to be getting relieved by 3rd Ranger Battalion. However, war kicks off in Iraq. And so we get extended, and one of my 3-month deployment ended up being a 6-month deployment.
Nice.
To Afghanistan. So we're just getting extended over and over and over again. Meanwhile, all the spouses back home, they're like, oh, your husbands are coming home. No, they're not. They're coming home next month. No, they're not. They're coming home next month. No, they're not. We had like the Ranger Regiment commander comes out finally after the initial surge is done over in Iraq. And they're like, boys, we're getting you home. So we call ourselves the Lost Company, Charlie Company 275 plus 1 platoon from Alpha Company, the Earth Pigs, 3rd Platoon Alpha Company. They were with us, and we were like the Lost Company, right? And we get the call like, you're going home, blah blah blah, and then he's out there with us in Asadabad, which is out in the Konar province, and we had been out there for 10 weeks, just kind of sucking it, eating rockets and RPGs and mortars 4 or 5 times a week, just a total like fishbowl of a shitty fire base. And comes out, tells us we're going home, and then that night after he kind of broke the boys and we all went back down to our hooches and whatnot, he had gotten a call from Kabul, and they said they ain't going anywhere. We've got some actionable intelligence. We're keeping them there for another month. And this, I felt so bad for the regimental commander, but nothing but respect. Who would go on to become General Joe Votel. Nothing but respect for General Votel, because he faced the music, came back, looked at us and said, like, I'm sorry, fellas, but we're going to stay in place. We're going to do our jobs, and we're going to take it to the enemy.
You're like, oh, damn it. Here we go.
Yeah.
Because those are, for people that don't know, those are like legitimate deployments. Like you said, they're shorter, but the tempo is so much higher. This isn't a regular infantry unit that's been given an AO and they're out doing foot patrols and something may occur. This is doing direct action missions, doing infills constantly, like there's a lot going on that type of deployment. You said that was on your second deployment. Can you describe your first deployment, what that first rotation was like to Afghanistan, and then kind of give us how those Ranger missions may have changed, or if they did change, like morph over the years over your 4 deployments?
Yeah. As soon as I stop choking on my water.
I hate it when that
for
happens.
Sure. I know. When we first went out there, it was very much, it was search and attack. So it was kind of like bread and butter infantry missions. We were inserted. I remember the first mission that we did. It was in a place called the Mir Kapar Valley, and we get inserted into this location, and there was essentially a backstop that had been created by ODA and a bunch of Afghan nationals. I don't really know who they were, mind you. Like in the Rangers, you're just very kind of like sequestered, and people of extreme focus. I don't know who they were, but
Yeah.
they were kind of the backstop, and our whole thrust was to essentially search and attack, clear through and push any of the Al Qaeda or Taliban over towards that backstop. And it was, like I even have it in my journal. It was supposed to be 7 days. It was like 7 days in the Mir Kapar Valley, and it ended up becoming like a joke because we cleared it in like 3. We just like kind of pushed through. And this is when I was telling you we had these Mujahideen guys with us, and it was like super odd. And and I'll tell you this, like one situation that happened that was really, I think, indicative of some of these first missions is we get there, and I remember them telling us like a good indicator of who's enemy and who's not, because we had no clue who the hell we were going after, is look for weapons and volleyball nets outside of their locations. For I'm like, volleyball nets, like what the hell are we talking about here? Are you freaking kidding me? And so weapons, volleyball nets, and then like, flags. And that was about all we had, Justin. And so we come up on this one, little compound and everything. Oh, and if there are no women and children out and about, like look for those things. That's all we had to go off of.
Mm-hmm.
So we come up on this one compound, and like point man's like, hey, I got a volleyball net, eyes on volleyball net, and we're like, okay, I guess that means something. Flags, guys walking around with AKs. We're like game on, like hell yeah. And so we line everybody up in an overwatch position. And like, meanwhile, the Mujahideen guys are like looking around, like, what's the situation? And, we're trying to get some kind of like, what do you think about these guys? And they're like, I don't know. So we're sitting there, everyone's got like a line of sight beat up on all these dudes. And I'm just like, if I give the signal, hit it. Right. And these Afghans that were rolling with us, they're like, I don't know. And they're just like, well, let me go talk to them. And so they go like walk up and talk to these guys, and they're like 300 meters away, and they're turning around. They give us like the thumbs up, like, nope, everything's good here. I don't know who the hell these guys were.
Yeah.
They could have been, like we just had no idea, but that's what it was like. It was one situation after another like that. We would set up in Hyde, you'd have Spectre, we'd be, burning buildings just to kind of like light it up to see like, what do we have here? Like while we're watching under nods, and just like, I don't know. Is it enemy? Is it not? I don't know. Are there any women around?
And when you say burning buildings, you mean light it up with the IR?
Light it up with IR. Yeah.
So for people that may not know, they're like, holy shit, he's just burning down buildings?
Yeah, no, my bad. Yeah, IR. We'd put them under the IR floodlight, and it was confusing.
Well, that's interesting, because later on in the war, it was mostly direct action raids in response to intelligence, correct? So this
Absolutely.
was more of like, so this is more of just kind of moving through an area and see what happens, like a recon by fire kind of deal, or
pretty much
not recon by fire, but
no, but I mean, search and attack would be the technical term, or some people might say movement to contact. I mean, it was a lot of stuff like that that's more than anything what I remember from my first deployment. Another situation in the first deployment, we did that Mirkapar thing. We come back, and then it was like, okay, we're going to put you guys out in a place called Lawara. And Lawara was basically Pakistan. And so we're out there, like, brother, we had all the maps that we had were Russian maps.
Oh yeah.
It was wild,
Old
right?
School. That's way back.
Yeah, I know. We were out there with Russian maps. We're in like a very small 4-walled compound, if you want to call it a compound. It's an ODA team, so that's Special Forces, a Green Beret team, for those of you listening that don't know. We had some dude from a 3-letter agency that nobody knew who the hell he was. We just called him Fat Tony, because if you saw Fat Tony, odds are you weren't going to see him again. And that's what would happen, is we would go out, we would try to ball up, suspicious kind of folks, and then bring him back, and you bring him back to Fat Tony, and you never see him again, right? And that's what it was like. And you would be out there on these like hellacious movements, trying to figure out, okay, well, let's go look at what's up on that ridgeline, what this is, or we would find, like these supply routes, or routes that they would be bringing weapons over the border from Pakistan. But the whole while, you might be in a location, and you'd be like, hey, ask the people, where are we, and they're like, we're in Pakistan. And you're like, okay, but the map, you're looking at this map, and it's like, well, we're not in Pakistan. And we're like, well, maybe we are. I don't know. It was a lot of stuff like that on our first mission, all while, and then chasing ghosts is the way that I would say it, is that, you would come back on, you maybe go do like a long patrol. You would come back, and, we're coming back in, and my alpha team leader, the point man, Jason Hoover, stops the whole thing, and he's just like, and we come walking up, and there's just a string of 107 rockets rigged on a time delay firing device, aimed right at the fire base that we're occupying out of. And it was bizarre. That was what my first rotation was like. The second rotation got different.
When you say I'm sure, especially as intelligence maps came out, like some imagery. When you say you were on a long patrol, do you mean like multi-day? You're on a multi-day operations, or you're talking about just okay. So you're not you guys aren't just setting up, establishing like a patrol base and then going out on daily patrols. You're going out on extended operations to surveil, reconnaissance, and develop targets.
Go. That's right. So leave out of the fire base under cover of darkness, gain altitude, climb these, as
legitimate mountains,
ridgeline, legit mountains, get up there to thousands of feet, establish a hide site, conduct surveillance and reconnaissance over, the town in the area, see if you can't identify something. And, you're just calling things up that you can make sense of, whatever you can make sense of. Okay, this one's seems to have radio antennas. Haven't seen any females or children walking around, starting to develop that kind of, intelligence. And that was kind of what the first one was really about for us.
Yeah. Yeah. That's, that makes sense. Early on in the war, got to kind of figure out what the hell's even going on, what's where. I talked to a guy, Todd Opolsky, who was a recon Marine and then went over to Delta for a little bit and then came back to recon. And his whole thing was like, at recon battalion, they went into Fallujah to support that push. And he's like, it doesn't matter what the satellite image shows. You have to send somebody in to verify, is that bridge actually there? Is this actually how old is that imagery? How accurate is that imagery? And he's like, there's always going to be a need to put someone on the ground. I don't necessarily agree with that in full before where we've gotten in drones. I do, and the whole point is that you got to do some good reconnaissance and understand what the battlefield even is before you can make smart tactical decisions. If you're using old Russian maps, let's hope that those are accurate. It's hard to do some plotting on a map like that, doing 2-point resections off mountains that are mislabeled and stuff. So
yeah. Fortunately, they were MGRS, military grid reference system enabled, and we were like, okay.
Oh, really?
At least, yeah.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. What an interesting time. Early Afghanistan, though. How did it feel to know you're like, dude, we're some of the first guys to be in country after this attack? Like, I always ask people that did the invasion of Iraq, I'm like, did you understand the momentous, how big this? You're in like a world history event. You're working on a world history event here. You're part of it, and I ask like how they feel about that. I feel like you weren't on. Okay, you didn't get to go do Rhino. That's a bummer, obviously. But you were still like that early phase. Like, you guys are some of the first guys going into Afghanistan after we were directly attacked. Did you feel the seriousness of that situation?
Yeah, we all felt it. We felt like we had the opportunity to take it to the enemy, and we were ready, and we were excited about that. We felt like we had the American people with us in spirit, and that we had the opportunity to be truly the tip of the spear and just take it right to the enemy.
Yeah. And I think, from all accounts, from what I've seen, like the Rangers did a really good job. Rangers and Special Operations troops did a good job of like basically annihilating the Taliban, pretty quickly in Afghanistan. Were you there during or before maybe Anaconda, the major operation that everyone talks about? Is that?
Yeah,
Anaconda?
I was there right after. So that was 1st Ranger Battalion's rotation, which then ended up, unfolding with the Battle of Takur Ghar, all that stuff that unfolds in Anaconda. So that was 1st Ranger Battalion that was there. So some of my, dear friends were there. One of my good friends was on that mission. And then the rotation cycle goes from there, right? So first and then second Ranger Battalion took the next one. So that's where at the time it was only companies, and then shortly thereafter it started to become battalions. And so I got there a couple months after all of that went down.
Yeah. Man, that's like the thing that I think a lot of people point out about the beginning. Some people say that we could have ended the war right then, but that it wasn't. I'm talking out of my ass right now because I only remember the operation kind of. I mean, you might be able to talk more about it, but I think the Rangers were pushing through there, right? And then there were some avenues of escape that were left open or something like that. Is that kind of how it went? I don't really know.
Yeah, I mean, I would be out of my depth to try and speak too deeply into it, but you mainly have the 10th Mountain Division, so infantry division that was over there quite a bit, doing a lot of the kind of stuff. And then you had what at the time was called AFOs, which were different JSOC elements that were broken down into like these advanced forward observer kind of observation teams that were doing a lot of reconnaissance. Rangers at the time, we were predominantly in quick reaction force capacity. And so that's when the Battle of Takur Ghar goes down, you've got SEALs who unfortunately had a big situation unfold, and they called the QRF, and that's where you get 1st Ranger Battalion elements come into that scene.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's a whole thing, man. There's so many like famous battles. I need to go back and refresh on some of them because obviously coming from the Marine Corps, I'm focused on a lot of what like the Marines did down in Helmand and things like that. And that's something I also remind people. I'm like, hey, before the surge happened in Afghanistan, there wasn't like a Marine AO. Like Helmand became a Marine AO. There were Marines in different parts of Afghanistan doing different things. And then when the surge was getting ready to happen, I believe what happened was there was some negotiating up at the Joint Chiefs level of who's going to run what parts, and the Marines only wanted to be supported by other Marines. They wanted to be self-sufficient because we bring the entire MAGTF is what we call it. And that's why the Marine Corps basically got stuck down in Helmand, and they only focused on that for the rest of the war. And then the rest of the country was the Army, and then special operations were sprinkled in a little bit everywhere.
Yeah, we were primarily, so, come my second rotation. So now this is, like I said, right after Christmas 02 and then into 03. I mean, we were heavily focused up in the Konar province. We were running what at the time, the Pesh River Valley Road was called Route Blue, and that was IED Alley to us because there had been so many mine strikes prior to. And so what we were doing is, with as best intelligence as we could get, as best target development that was being done, we would go, we would either be going to try and do an assault, traveling obviously during the night. We'd never traveled during day, these kind of things. I spent 10 weeks in Asadabad, which is, right there at the, in the Konar province, right off the Konar River, where it intersects with the Pesh River. And we were just doing constant operations. Sometimes it felt like we were just trying to stay as active as possible to keep kind of any enemy people back, or keep them on their heels if we stayed on our toes. Mm-hmm. It was just a lot of those long movements like I described before. There was I seem to remember, and mind you, this was over 20 years ago, but I seem to remember there was kind of like this resupply line that they were using. So we would go up and set up some ambushes. We never caught anybody, but what we did is we caught a lot of 107 rockets and RPGs and mortars coming down on our fire base. I mean, it was like day in and day out, and it was what it felt like was incredibly maddening, Justin, is what it felt like, because we knew the intel that we were getting was that they were instructed, the Al Qaeda or Taliban were instructed, like, do not get into a direct fire conflict with the Americans. And so it literally was month after month, mission after mission of chasing ghosts, trying to catch these cats. Sometimes we'd, I seem to recall vaguely, we hit this compound and then just hauled out piles and piles of weapons, sandbagged these dudes' heads, put them on a black Chinook, and, they never came back, I'm sure. Stuff like that was really the kind of standard.
That's awesome, though. I mean, if you're going to take guys out, it's always nice when at the end of the day you can go, yeah, that was legitimate. Like, that was a legitimate bad guy,
Yeah.
People don't see that. People don't hear about that, especially as the war went on. It kind of became back page news, And really, a lot of times you only heard about anything in the war if something bad happened. Either a bunch of people had been killed or someone did something wrong. And other than that, the actual missions like what you're talking about just kind of went under the radar, kind of went underreported. And I don't know. What are you going to do about that? That's legitimate, though. I mean, that's a good mission.
Yeah. I mean, it's
there's worse missions to have in Afghanistan.
I think so. And I think that I appreciate that. I mean, that's the right perspective. When you're in it, though, and you're a ranger and all is close with and destroy, close with and destroy, close with and destroy. And then you're like, what the hell? Like, we're nobody wants to fight us today.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like so frustrating at the beginning, but
and they're like MacGyver with their like rockets and with their IEDs and stuff. There's so many ways to launch them.
Oh my God. We'd just be sucking rockets all the time. And then finally, you get to the point, like I remember like I said, we've been in ABAD for so long, whatever, it'd be 1 o'clock in the morning or something and you'd go boom, you hear it. And then like, at first you're like, everybody's like moving out and like doing the stuff and, every this and that. And then, after a couple weeks or something of that, it's boom. And you like open your eye and you're like incoming or outgoing. Yeah. I think that was outgoing. All right. Go back to sleep, right? I mean, that's just like the way it goes.
That's reality in that kind of world.
Yeah.
So when I first joined, I was a mechanic. I came in open contract. They made me a mechanic and I was miserable because I wanted infantry. But anyways, my first deployment I did was to Iraq as a mechanic and I was on base all the time. And when we first got there, we were at Chow and we just heard boom, and I'm like, what the? We all kind of like look at each other like, what the hell? And then this like contractor that was there kind of laughed and was like, that's for EOD setting stuff off. He's like, you only have to be worried if it's more than one explosion. Then a second later, boom, another one went off, and I'm like, wait, are we getting mortared? Found out that it was EOD setting stuff off, but then that happened semi-regularly because we were on a bigger base and they would bring shit back there to blow in place or, to detonate. When we were getting mortared, we never knew. You'd hear an explosion was like, was that EOD or we'll find out later. I mean, it didn't hit us. So whatever it was didn't hit us. So it just becomes part of life,
It does. And, I told you that first mission that we went into, it was actually, I look back on it and I kind of chuckle a little bit because we come in and, we get off the MH-47s and everything like that. And then you start hearing this crack, 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 this and that. And I remember looking over at my platoon sergeant, Chad, and he and I looked at each other. I'm like, are we taking fire? It's like, I think we're taking fire. And then it's just like all of a sudden, you just get down, like you just don't, like the first times those things start to happen, it's almost like this abstract occurrence, like, oh goodness gracious, we are taking fire. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. It's almost like that scene in Black Hawk Down where that gunner on the truck was like, sir, they're shooting at us. And he's like, well, shoot back. And he's like, oh, like, what are you do what you were trained to do? Exactly.
But it's just like, what? Like it's wild when it happens. And so
reality sets in too. Reality starts to set in.
Real quick.
How long Did you guys take any casualties on your first deployment?
No, we didn't take any casualties until our third rotation. And
Wow.
so we, that was, so, fast forward and, I'll tell you one more thing that happened on when we got extended is like, we were pretty bummed. We got extended. It sucked. It was frustrating. And we were like, ugh, like everybody's over in Iraq just getting after it. Like, come on, man.
It's funny you're not talking about wanting to go home. You're wanting to get over to the other war zone.
Oh, dude, come on, man.
That brings back exactly what we were talking about earlier.
I know, we're just like, ugh. But then we were watching. I was, like you could go into the jock and like we were looking at the air mission brief and like the plan to assault BIOP. It was like, yeah, we might lose 2 or 3 C-17s, and you're like, wait, that's like almost an entire Ranger battalion. Like, what? And thank God the 3rd Infantry Division, Thunder Run, they just sliced right through and beat that thing up. Thank God. But so I'm over there in Afghanistan, and this was actually unexpected, but we actually got an airborne operation. We got a jump mission while we were over there. And so Objective Raptor. So one platoon from 2nd Ranger Battalion happened to be my platoon. I happened to get to jump master this jump, which was pretty badass. And it was right at the tri-border region of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Iran. So we go do this thing. We jump, and it was a an information and observation campaign. We were trying to spike up some movement. Again, this is another kind of like almost like a search and attack kind of thing. Like, let's see if we can't stir some stuff up. So we go in at dusk, and so that we could be seen, so that we could spike movement. We jump onto a dried out lake bed, do what we do, jump, you clear, expand the airhead line, all that kind of stuff. Establish an airfield. So the combat controllers establish literally an airfield in this dried out lake bed. We call in some 130s. 130s come in. We extracted a AFO team and inserted another AFO team. All this stuff kind of happens, and like all the while, like you don't really know what is this leading to. Like what is this creating? All I know is that pretty cool. I got to actually do this in real life.
Yeah, combat jump.
Yeah, got to actually do it in real life. And I mean, I make no bones about it. Like, there's not like, nobody was shooting at us. There was no like bullets ripping through the fuselage. I would say like the most exciting thing that happened is that the Iranian ADA was painting our bird. So we've got like these Talons doing evasive maneuvers and all this kind of stuff, and which was wild. We do the jump. We do all that, and you don't really know what's going on because then you get extracted and all this kind of stuff. And then turns out, a couple days after that jump, we snatched up Khalid Sheikh Mohammed over the border in Pakistan, and you're like, maybe that had something to do with it. Maybe
set
we
off his
stirred up
communications.
Maybe we spiked some movement, and yeah, you don't really fully know, but all you know is that you do the job that you're given to do, and you do it to the best of your ability, and you hope to take some bad guys off the board. And
so with that, do you get to put a star on your jump wings for that?
Yeah,
that's badass, right?
Pretty badass.
I mean, when you're talking about jumpers, right? When you're looking around and you see a dude that's got a star on his jump wings, that's like, oh shit! Like, where's that guy been?
Yeah, one platoon. So the only platoon from 2nd Ranger Battalion, and it's not a very, very widely known fact or story, because most of the jumps from the Ranger Regiment were done. I think 3rd Ranger Battalion hit a couple of airfields. They, of course, did Rhino. They did H1 and H3 in Iraq.
That's the Haditha Dam, right? That one?
Haditha is another big mission that they did.
I actually had one of the 160th Little Bird pilots on, and he was the Little Bird pilot supporting that. And he was like, dude, yeah, it was a bad situation. He's like, I was the only guy there for a little bit. Like, he was just doing circles, like doing CAS, close air support for those guys while they were fighting it out.
All the while, our regimental command sergeant major was running around with an SR-25, just smoking dudes. But yeah, the Haditha Dam was no joke, but I was not there.
That's another guy's story. But you got a star on your jump wing, so you know what? Frick 'em.
I mean, yeah, you do what you do. You do the job that you can do, right?
You know, you got to get more flair, and we know how the Army loves flair on their uniforms. So,
oh my god, dude, I spent the remaining years, so my Ranger buddies is like, "Are you shitting me? You got a mustard stain for that?" I'm like, "Hey, man, I don't know what to tell you."
That's life.
And they're like, I mean, I'm jealous. The reason I'm saying is because I'm jealous. I'm pissed that I don't have a mustard stain. I'm like, no, I know that's why you're saying that.
It's like, so in the Marine Corps, there's really not a lot that goes on uniforms, like, especially in your service uniform, you're wearing, or like your camis. Maybe if you're recon, you're wearing your jump wings and dive bubbles. If you're jump qualified, you're wearing jump wings. If you're a pilot, but that's really it. You're not really seeing, and even on your dress uniforms, that's really it. You may have jump wings or something like that. It's all mostly ribbons and medals. And I remember being like a junior guy. I was like a Lance Corporal, maybe a PFC still. I don't even remember. And I saw this staff sergeant that had a combat action ribbon with 2 stars on it. And this was in 2007. And for those that don't know what that is, a combat action ribbon means that you've gone on a deployment and then you've also been in combat. So there's a lot of people that went to Afghanistan that basically went and enjoyed green bean coffee and kind of did their logistics job and stuff. And there's nothing wrong with that. They had a role to play. Absolutely. But if you went out and you got in combat, actual combat, then you earn the combat action ribbon and you wear that on your service and dress uniforms. And I remember seeing this guy with two stars on it, which means he had been in 3 different war zones and seen combat in 2007. And I'm like, what? Who is this guy? And that's probably kind of what it's like when if there's like a new guy before you got out or something, saw you and was like, holy shit, this guy's got a star on his jump wings. Like he did a combat jump. That's almost unheard of then, right?
Yeah. I mean, and in addition to that, like what we have is, we have a combat infantryman's badge.
More flair.
And so that's it. Yeah. More flair. We got to have it. It's that blue rifle with the wreath around it. The blue rifle is the expert infantryman's badge, and you test out for all of that. And I have that too. But, the combat infantryman's badge is very analogous to what you just described. So basically, it's not just that you went to a combat zone. In the Army, when you go to a combat zone and you are serving in that capacity, you get a combat patch. So the unit that you're with goes on your right shoulder, and it can be on your right shoulder for the rest of your career. Mm-hmm. It's not the same as, as receiving a combat infantryman's badge or a combat action badge for non-infantry MOSs. You get that when you take fire and return fire with the enemy, which I think is essentially what you're discussing in terms of combat. And so, it was pretty cool. I could walk into any room and everybody knew exactly what that meant.
Damn.
Son of a bitch.
That's the epitome of, that's like one of the things of like always practicing for the big day and never getting to do it. Like paratroopers know that more than anybody probably, right?
Absolutely, man. I mean, hey, man, my back is destroyed now, but at least I got a mustard stain out of it.
Going into an actual, so we're talking real life now, real life jump. It's easy to look back and go, it was no big deal. It was no one there. But when you're leading up to it, this is a serious event. This is no like
big time.
Who did I assume the observers that FSOs, is that what you called them?
AFO.
The AFOs, were they the ones that kind of did the airfield or like your landing zone? What do they call that? Where they like go in first, check the landing zone?
Yeah. So it was actually the Ranger Reconnaissance Detachment went in and did that. They reconned out the entire thing. I'm sure they probably did it by halo jump.
That's what I was getting ready to ask. Did they halo in?
I'm sure that they did. Awesome. They spotted out the dried out lake bed, and then obviously fed up all the information to put in when you're doing a jump. You have a CARP on the aircraft, the computed assisted release point, so that exactly by GPS and all that kind of stuff where you actually turn the green light on. the backdrop as a jump master, which I was, is that you actually hang out of the door and you spot the drop zone. You can't technically release, or you're not supposed to technically release, anybody unless you can spot the drop zone. But yeah, all of that kind of happens. So you have like a reconnaissance element that's out there. They're spotting this whole thing. There was an AFO out there from, another special mission unit. They're out there doing their thing. We know our thing is to, jump in, establish an airhead line. We actually had a company of the 82nd Airborne come in after us as well. So again, this is all IO space, right? So think about like Operation Market Garden, if you want to get a comparison, where you're trying to get the enemy to see you.
Yeah, for sure. So the 82nd had guys jump in as well.
They had a company jump in after we had expanded the airhead line.
That's definitely some bragging rights outside of, they're not even in SOCOM, and they can, that's a huge deal for those outside of that community. I mean, my dad was in the Army, and I grew up wanting to join the Army and join the Rangers, and I was dead set all the way into high school. And then I read Marine Sniper, and that flipped me over to the Marines.
I get it.
So I understand all the Army stuff too. It's like, I appreciate like,
I thought I was going to go into the Marines.
Did you?
I went into the Army.
See what happens?
Yeah, man,
after reading Marine Sniper, I was like, it's interesting how things like that can, back in the day when you joined, and not really as much when I joined, it started to change. But back when you joined, there wasn't a lot of information out there for military specialties, different units. It was like maybe someone wrote a book and you go to your local library and check it out, because there's no Amazon. You're not ordering this interesting book, so maybe you'd go to the library and check out this
Soldier of Fortune magazine, like maybe you could get a copy of that.
Yeah, occasionally Discovery Channel would do some kind of documentary that's like probably 70% correct on some kind of military training, and it's like, oh, that's what I want to do. And then obviously you have to, like a crackhead, continuously watch Full Metal Jacket over and over again.
100%. 100%. And Heartbreak Ridge.
And Heartbreak Ridge. Heartbreak Ridge is hilarious. As a Marine, Heartbreak Ridge is hilarious because it's obviously, they say it's in North Carolina, but it's obviously at Camp Pendleton. And for a lot of people who didn't know, that was supposed to be the Army. It was supposed to be an Army movie.
2nd and 1st Ranger Battalion.
Yeah, it was supposed, but there was something with the PR.
Grenada.
They didn't want the way it was represented. They didn't want their units to be represented like that. And the Marines were like, fuck it. Bring them in.
100%, dude. 100%. And like knowing that like that was Operation Urgent Fury, the Grenada, 1st and 2nd Ranger Battalion jump in. Even, the scene where Mario Van Peebles is calling in fire, with like a telephone.
On the telephone,
that happened.
Yeah.
That actually happened.
And now the Marines get credit because it's in a movie.
Hey,
Stolen Valor.
Yeah.
It's a classic.
Yeah, and you had asked me, and I'll go back to it, so the first casualty that we took in 2nd Ranger Battalion, so I come back from that second deployment, which ended up being 2 rotations in one, but whatever, I only call it 1 rotation. But so I come back from that, and at this point in time, I've got a baby at home. I've got we've been married for almost 2 years. Baby doesn't know who I am. My son doesn't know who I am. Like we're struggling, and I'm holding on by a thread. And so I said, hey, I've been in the battalion for 6 years now. Can I go down to the Ranger Regiment headquarters and actually be a Ranger Indoctrination program instructor? Like, I got to take a couple plays off from the sidelines here because it was clear that this was not slowing down anytime soon.
Yeah. So
I get granted that, and I'm got the house half packed up. And we share this. This is the first chapter of the book, Perseverance is Greater Than Endurance, and we use this as a just a way to kind of show what the difference between the two really is. So like I got half the house packed up. I go to work one morning in October. I don't come home until December. We get alerted. The entire Ranger Regiment gets sent back over to Afghanistan. We're deep up in the Nuristan province. We're clearing towns and villages at 11,000 feet. The valley floor is 7,000 feet. we're so high up that the aircraft, and it's so cold because it's the winter. This is called Winter Strike 2003. We're so high up, as you know, when the temperature drops and the altitude increases, air lift capability decreases. So they couldn't resupply us. They had to drop 1 meal per man per day at the base of these 2 valleys. And as we're continuing to patrol up the Cantigua Valley, we have to send an element down every day to recover those meals. I mean, we're down 20, 30 pounds each. We're sustained operations, got 100-pound rucksacks, the whole 9 yards. So we're deep up in this, and we again happen to be at a pause point in Cantigua South, where we've got the village strong pointed. We've got guys in security postures. We have an observation post kicked out, the whole 9 yards. And over the command satellite radio, we learn that Sergeant J. Anthony Blessing, on November 14th, 2003, was killed outside of Nangalam, Afghanistan, by a roadside bomb. So I remember I told you earlier in our conversation, Pesh River Valley Road, Route Blue, particularly between checkpoints 2 and 3, right in front of Nangalam, was like the no-go, and they got hit right there. And so Jay was a great guy. He was a friend. We came up together in Alpha Company, 2nd Ranger Battalion. And yeah, man, like it was pretty devastating, I think, for all of us, because up until now, it had all been
one way.
Whatever, one way. Yeah. And now they took, one of our brothers away from us, and it was heavy.
It becomes more real, it lifts the facade for some people that are kind of in this daze where, I don't know, where this is just not as dangerous. You don't think it's as dangerous as it is until someone gets killed. Then you're like, wait a minute, or, one story, I'll tell one quick story and then we'll jump off here because I know we're running out of time. But I remember when we deployed to Afghanistan with my advisor team, we got off the bird, and I think it was like we had just got off the bird and half my team had deployed before and then the other half hadn't. We're a small team, like 18 guys or something like that. And, I remember, I think it was 3 Black Hawk medevac choppers taking off. And one of the lieutenants that was with us that hadn't deployed yet was like, well, maybe they're going on a training run or something like that. And I'm like, dude, training's over, man. I'm like, that's something for real. That's for real. Happened. And then like the next day I was going over to the airfield to get updated maps. Cause at this point I was like one of the first, we started using these tablets that have map data on it. And the squadron had the most up-to-date map data. And me and my corpsman went over there because we were going to meet with the squadron and talk to them and then go talk to the medevac guys and introduce him. And, just do some, it's always good to like make liaison with these people that you're going to be working with. So we went and did that. And I remember as we were walking by the main medical facility on Leatherneck, a Chinook comes in and just starts offloading people. And I was just like, fuck, man, you see all these people wrapped up and they had been hit by a car bomb. And I was just like, and there's these nurses sitting here crying and stuff, or like, we're all kind of seeing the same thing because we're just happen to be walking by and you see it and you're like, fuck, and it's that reality. And this is on my way in. I'm getting ready to leave Leatherneck and go into Sangin, which has its own reputation. And that really sits in the back of your mind, like, all right, man, like game on, like everything else has got to go to the wayside. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that happened. I had a similar circumstance happen on my first deployment. One of the 160th DAPs actually crashed at East River Range over in Afghanistan. And it was like, wait a minute, like we're now,
we don't crash. We don't do that.
Transporting bodies onto the C-17 to send them home, the full ramp ceremony, cordon lined up, everyone saluting. I happen to be driving one of the bodies and you're just like, holy shit, like we're playing for keeps here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good way to end it, man. I think, I really appreciate you coming on, Brandon, this has been great. You want to plug your book and your socials and stuff like that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we have a book out there. It's called Perseverance is Greater Than Endurance. You can find it anywhere books are sold. If you want to go to a website where it has it all right there, go to www.perseverancebook.com. You can hit me up on Instagram. I'm at brandon.young14. And our company is at Applied Leadership Partners on Instagram as well. You can find us at appliedleadershippartners.com as well if you like. And yeah, that's where we're at.
And my website's J Cramer Graphics. My Instagram is at Former Action Guys and at Former Action News. Hit me up there. And, man, I really appreciate you coming on today.
Thanks for having me, brother. Appreciate you.